On the night I opened my front door to a stranger in a blizzard, I had less than $20 to my name and a heart that was tired of being wrong about people. I thought I was just trying to keep one scared father and his sick little girl from freezing to death. I had no idea he was a billionaire, or that saying yes in that moment would drag me from a dark little house on Maple Ridge Road all the way to a state capitol hearing where people in suits questioned whether I deserved to be there at all. My name is Kosha, and if you'd seen me that night, you never would have guessed any of that. The power was out, the wind was screaming around the corners of the house, snow slamming against the windows like handfuls of gravel. I was sitting by the fireplace with a blanket around my shoulders, counting how many logs were left, and pretending I wasn't scared about the overdue electric bill sitting on the table. Then the pounding started, not a polite knock, not, "Hey neighbor, you got some sugar?" I mean someone hitting my front door like the world was ending, sharp and desperate and getting louder. The fire poker slipped in my hand because my palms went sweaty all at once and my brain went straight back to that other night, a year before. A woman with a story about a broken-down car, me opening the door because I was raised to help people waking up the next morning to find my grandma's jewelry box and my emergency cash gone. The cops shrugging the insurance company saying, "Sorry, nothing we can do," and me swearing I would never be that stupid again. "Please," a man's voice yelled over the wind. "Please, my daughter's sick, she needs help." And I remember thinking, sure, that's what they always say. There's always a story, but then I heard it. A small, ragged cough, the kind that rattles all the way down in a kid's chest, and something in me moved, even while the rest of me said, "Don't you dare." I crept to the door with the poker in my hand, peeked through the frosted glass, and saw a big guy hunched over, blocking the wind with his body. And in his arms, a little girl. Her face pale except for 2 bright fever spots. Her hair stiff with snow, her head flopping against his shoulder as he tried to keep her close. My heart was pounding so loud, I could feel it in my throat. All my instincts yelling, "Lock the door. Walk away." You already learned this lesson, and underneath that, like a radio station barely coming through the static, I could hear my grandma's voice, "Baby, when somebody needs help and you can give it, you give it. Don't let fear make you small." My hand was shaking on the deadbolt, and I swear I had this split second where I could see my life in 2 directions. One where I walked away from that door and never knew what happened to that kid, and one where I opened it and took the risk on the kind of person I wanted to be. So I cussed under my breath, took a breath that hurt all the way down, and turned the lock. The cold hit me first. Then the smell of wet wool and fear. The man stumbled in with the girl in his arms, snow clinging to his hair and lashes. His lips cracked from the wind. "Thank you. Thank you so much." He gasped, and I said, "Get inside before you both freeze, but listen. I've got my phone right here, and I will call the police if anything feels off, because courage is one thing, stupidity is another." He nodded like he understood exactly how close I was to throwing them both back out the door. "My name's Ray," he said. "This is my daughter Zara," and he laid her on my old couch by the fire, with the kind of careful, practiced movement you only see in parents who've done this too many nights. Her skin was hot, her forehead damp, her breathing shallow, little whimpers catching in her throat. And my training as a home health aide kicked in before my fear could catch up. I've taken care of a lot of people whose names nobody knows, and sick is sick no matter who it belongs to. I kept the poker close while I grabbed towels and dry clothes and that old quilt my grandma made out of dresses she'd worn to church. It's one of the few nice things I own, hand-stitched edges, a little frayed but still holding strong. And I looked at that little girl shaking on my couch and thought, all right, this is what it's for. While I warmed up some canned soup and water on the gas stove, I watched Ray out of the corner of my eye. He peeled off his soaked jacket, wrapped Zara tighter, talked to her in that soft, low voice dads use when they're trying not to show they're terrified. Everything about him was focused on her. He wasn't casing my tiny house. He wasn't looking for jewelry or electronics. There really wasn't much to look at anyway, but still I studied his hands, his eyes, his body language, trying to decide if I was going to regret this. Eventually, the power stayed off, the house shrank down to the circle of firelight, and 2 candles, Zara sipping soup, with shaking hands, while he held the mug steady. Me in the armchair, with the poker leaning beside me, not quite ready to let go of the fear. And somehow we started talking in those little broken pieces you share, when you're stuck with strangers in the dark. He told me about the drive, how they were trying to get to Zara's grandmother, on the other side of the county, because her heart was failing. The storm rolled in. Early, his rental car slid off the road, no cell signal, and my place was the only house with a light on. I told him about my dad, how he'd worked maintenance at the elementary school, until a heart attack took him at 53. How he used to say, the most important work is the stuff nobody sees, making sure the heat works and the roof doesn't leak so other people can do their jobs. And I could feel my shoulders slowly unclench as we compared different versions of the same kind of loss. His wife gone from cancer, my grandma gone from time, both of us trying to pretend we'd figured out how to live without them. Somewhere in that long, cold night, Zara's fever spiked again, and my body went straight into caretaker mode. Cool compresses, ginger tea with honey, opening the window an inch to let the stale air out, closing it. When she shivered, humming those old spirituals my grandma used to hum, while she washed dishes when the world felt too heavy. Ray watched with this expression that was equal parts panic and gratitude. "You're good at this," he said quietly, "taking care of people." And I shrugged it off like it was nothing. But inside it hit a place that had been empty since my job got cut. By the time morning came and the plow scraped its way up Maple Ridge Road, the worst of the fever had broken, the fire was down to coals, and I'd lost count of how many times I'd thought, okay, maybe I didn't make a huge mistake opening that door then. Ray's whole energy shifted. He looked like a man about to confess something that might change everything. "Kesha," he said, standing in my little kitchen, fingers drumming on the counter. "There's something I should have told you from the beginning. Now let me tell you, if a grown man starts a sentence like that in your house, your stomach is going to drop." Fine. I crossed my arms and said, "What, you married? You running from something?" "What?" And he let out this bitter little laugh and said, "I run a company, Thompson Industries. We make construction and agricultural equipment. We've got about 3,000 employees across several states, and on paper, people call me a billionaire." I just stared at him, then at my chipped countertops. The pantry with 2 cans of soup and some ramen in it, the old coffee maker, that only works if you smack the side twice, and I felt this hot flare of anger shoot up my spine. So what was this? I asked. Some kind of experiment. See how the poor folks live, see how generous the little country girl is. He shook his head fast. Hands up. "No, it wasn't like that when I knocked on your door. I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking my daughter might die in the snow. You saw a man and a sick kid, that's it. You have no idea how rare that is in my world." And I snapped back. "You let me think you were like me. You let me feel stupid for being scared, and then stupid for helping. You didn't lie, but you sure didn't tell the truth either." He took that hit without flinching. "You saw a regular guy, because that's what I am, underneath all the numbers. Money didn't change how cold it was out there. Didn't change Zara's fever. And I didn't correct you, because for once it felt good to just be a dad who needed help, not someone people wanted something from. And as mad as I was, I could hear the truth in that, but I still told him straight, I don't want your money. I don't want payback. I helped because it was right, not because I thought you were going to show up later like a fairy godfather. When he and Zara finally left in that shiny SUV that looked like it belonged in another universe, I stood at the window and watched the taillights disappear into the white. The house suddenly too quiet, too empty. And when I came back to the kitchen, I saw he'd left an envelope on the table. Inside was a card. Ray Thompson, CEO, Thompson Industries. And on the bottom, he'd written, "Thank you for seeing us as people first. You changed something in me." I put that card in the drawer with the property tax bill and my grandma's will and told myself I would never use it because I still had my pride and my stubbornness and this idea that needing help made me weak. Fast forward 3 weeks, and life punched straight through that pride. The agency I worked for lost their county contract and laid almost everybody off. Last hired, first fired. "I'm so sorry," my supervisor said. But sorry didn't pay the mortgage 2 days later. I went to the diner where I picked up shifts and found a closed permanently sign on the door. The owner's medical bills had wiped him out. Suddenly, both of my income streams vanished in less time than it takes. A shut-off notice to arrive. And trust me, those notices move fast. I tried to hold it together. I applied everywhere in town. Grocery store, gas station, hardware, pharmacy. But everybody was cutting hours, not adding. I sold my grandma's china cabinet for a fraction of what it was worth. Then my dining table, then my dad's old tools. Every sale felt like losing them all over again. But the fridge was getting emptier. The woodpile was disappearing, and winter was still sitting outside like it had nowhere else to be. The day the electric company called to confirm they'd be shutting off my power in 48 hours, I sat at the kitchen table staring at that red-letter notice with $17.32 in my account, and half a loaf of bread on the counter. And something in me just cracked. I put my head down and sobbed. The kind of sobs that feel like somebody's ripping you open from the inside. I cried for my grandma, for my dad, for that girl a year ago who opened the door and got robbed, for the woman I was now, who had done everything right and was still losing. When the tears finally ran out, I felt empty, like there was nothing left but this small, hard knot of survival. And that's when I remembered the card in the drawer. I fought with myself for days, carrying it around, telling myself I didn't need him, that I'd figure it out, that calling would make everything that happened between us mean something. It wasn't, but hunger and cold are louder than pride, so yeah, I called. The receptionist sounded very polished. "Thompson Industries, how may I direct your call?" My voice shook when I said, "Can you please tell Ray Thompson that Keisha from Maple Ridge Road called?" There was a pause, then hold music. Then his voice warm and urgent. "Keisha, are you okay? What's going on?" And just like that, the dam broke again. I told him everything. The layoffs, the closed diner selling my furniture, the shut-off notice, the empty fridge, how stupid I felt for even making the call. And I kept saying, "I'm not asking for money. I just thought maybe you know someone who's hiring. I'll do anything. I just need work so I can stand on my own 2 feet. And he cut in firm but gentle. "Stop, where are you right now? Do you have heat? Do you have food?" I wanted to lie, I really did, but I was too tired, so I said not much. No firewood, some bread and peanut butter. And he muttered a curse under his breath and said, "Okay, I'm coming. I'm leaving right now. And before you argue, this isn't charity. This is me practicing what you preached to me that night. People help each other when they can." An hour and 47 minutes later, his SUV pulled into my driveway again, this time in clear, cold daylight. He and Zara climbed out with their coats zipped up and arms full of grocery bags. Zara grinned up at me. "We brought dinner," she said. "Real cornbread, not from a box," and I wanted to slam the door on my own. Shame on how hungry I was, on how much I needed what they were carrying, but instead I stepped back and let them in. We unpacked the bags together. Real food, vegetables with color, meat that wasn't from the discount bin, milk, eggs, rice, canned goods that would last. He didn't say anything about how bare my cupboards were, didn't give me any speeches, just quietly filled the shelves like it was the most normal thing in the world. After we ate, when Zara had wandered off to color at the coffee table, he looked at me across the same scarred wood and said, "I need to tell you what else happened after that storm." He talked about how the time he spent snowed in at my place had shaken him awake, how he'd started asking hard questions at his company about what they were doing for the communities they operated in, how he'd decided to start a new division focused on real community work instead of PR stunts, and then he dropped the part. "I did not see coming. I want you to run it," he said. I laughed like full-on, almost choked on my water, I said. "Ray, I'm a laid-off home health aide who can't keep her lights on. I don't have a degree. I don't speak corporate. I didn't go to whatever school people who run programs go to," and he just shook his head. "I've interviewed people with all the degrees. They talk about demographics and brand alignment. You talk about Ms. Patterson and Mr. Lewis and how it feels to sit in the dark with a shut-off notice on the table. I can teach you budgets and grant language. I cannot teach you that." We went back and forth for a long time, me saying no, him explaining the position could be remote. So I didn't have to leave my house telling me the salary, the benefits, the training they'd set up to get me up to speed, my pride throwing up obstacles every time. "I don't want to be your charity case. I don't want to be a mascot. I don't want you to keep me around because you feel guilty about that night." And me finally setting conditions. "If I do this, I make real decisions. I'm not your little inspiring story in the brochures. And if I'm not good at it, you fire me like anyone else, no special treatment." And he said, "Deal, and to be clear, this isn't me paying you back for that storm. This is me hiring the right person for a job, because I want this thing to actually work." Training nearly broke me in a different way than the shut-off notice did. I went from measuring out meds and changing sheets to sitting in conference rooms, learning about nonprofit law and outcome metrics and budgets, with more zeros than I'd ever seen in my life. Half the time I felt like an imposter sitting there in my thrift store blazer, while people said things like strategic alignment and stakeholder engagement. But every time I wanted to quit, I thought about that girl on my couch, that red envelope with the disconnect date, my grandma's voice saying, "Don't let fear make you small," and I stayed. We launched the Community Bridge Initiative in a dusty old storefront in Riverside. I didn't start by designing programs. I started by sitting in diners and church basements, asking people, "What do you actually need?" Not, "What do you think we want to hear?" And the answers were so simple and so complicated at the same time. Child care that matched second shift schedules, job training that led to real jobs, food support that didn't make them feel like beggars. So we built those things piece by piece, me and a small team, who believed enough to work ridiculous hours for not a lot of pay because they knew what it felt like to be on the other side. It worked, not perfectly, not smoothly, but it worked. People got jobs, found stability, kids had safe places to be, and right when the numbers started to prove we weren't crazy, the pushback hit. A councilman named Jeffrey Davis went to the local paper and basically said, "Why is a woman with no degree running a $2 million program? And what exactly is her relationship with the billionaire who hired her?" They put my picture on the front page under words like favoritism and questions of impropriety. The comments online were brutal, some of them racist, some of them classist, all of them mean. And I sat in my little office reading them until my hands shook, thinking maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't belong here. Maybe I was just some charity project in a new dress. My staff didn't let me wallow long. Angela, my right hand, closed my laptop and said, "You gonna believe anonymous commenters or the 200 families who can pay rent this month because of this place?" And she was right. So instead of shrinking, I opened us wider. We posted every dollar that came in and every dollar that went out. invited journalists to see what we were doing, gave community members the mic, and told them, "Tell your story in your own words." The narrative started to shift, but it never got easy. And just when I thought I'd made peace with being doubted forever, the company board decided the program was too controversial and cut the funding. That was the real twist in the middle of all this. Sitting in Ray's office, watching him struggling to explain that the same shareholders who praised him for profit margins were now terrified of anything that looked political. "They want safer projects," he said. "Scholarships, museum wings, things nobody can complain about." And I remember feeling this wave of cold wash over me that had nothing to do with snow. "So that's it," I said. "We just tell all these people." "Sorry, the stock price was uncomfortable." He shook his head. "No, I'm moving it out of the company. I'll fund a new independent nonprofit myself to get us started. It'll be smaller, the budget will be tighter. You'll have less backup, but it will be ours. The question is, do you want to fight from the ground up or walk away?" And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about me anymore or him. It was about all the people who'd started to trust that our door would stay open. We cut salaries, including mine. We hustled for grants. We asked churches for space and local businesses for partnerships. We built a community advisory board that could tell me when I was getting it wrong. We nearly ran out of money more than once. I lay awake plenty of nights staring at the ceiling, doing math in my head, wondering if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. And then one day, an email came inviting me to testify in front of a state legislative committee about a bill that could fund programs like ours across the state. And suddenly, that woman who once cried over a shut-off notice was sitting in a big room under fluorescent lights with a microphone and a timer, trying not to throw up, while people in suits stared down at her. One senator asked me straight up about my lack of credentials, and I decided if I was going down, I was going down honest. "You're right," I said. "I don't have the degrees. You're used to seeing what I do have, is years of choosing between gas and groceries, years of taking care of people in drafty houses where the heat barely works, years of watching systems fail, the same folks over and over. That's what I bring into the room. And if we're designing programs for those people, maybe someone who's actually lived that should have a say, and for once, nobody had a clever comeback." The bill passed, not just because of me. There were a lot of us pushing, but they wrote parts of it based on what we were doing at Community Bridge, community oversight, real metrics support that treats people with dignity instead of suspicion. And when I got the call that it was signed into law, I sat in my office surrounded by photos of families we'd helped, and I just let myself cry, not from fear this time, but from something like relief, like maybe all the nights I'd spent doubting myself weren't wasted. 2 years after that storm, the snow came back thick and heavy. I was in my house on Maple Ridge Road again, only this time, the lights were fully paid up. The roof didn't leak, my dad's tools were back in the shed because I'd tracked down the guy I sold them to and bought them back. My grandma's quilt was still on the back of the couch, and there were 2 drawings framed on the wall. The first one Zara had given me that night, of a little house in the snow, with a woman opening the door and light spilling out, and a newer one she'd mailed me showing that same door, but now with people passing that light hand to hand through a whole community. When Ray and Zara knocked that day, it wasn't desperate. It was just family. Zara barreled in with a folder from school. "I won first place," she said. "We had to draw someone who changed our life, and yeah, it was me on that porch again. But this time there were all these other figures behind me. Board members, staff, neighbors, all of us linked. And I thought, we really have no idea what one scared yes on a cold night can grow into. I still get people who think I don't belong in the rooms I'm in. Still get side eyes from folks who base worth on resumes and bank accounts. Still have days I question myself. You know what I mean? But every time I start to shrink, I remember the sound of that pounding on my door, the way fear and compassion fought inside my chest, and I choose to keep the door open or try to. So now I want to ask you, if you were me that night, what would you have done? Would you have opened the door for a stranger in the middle of a storm, knowing what had happened to you before? And looking at the rest of it, do you think someone like me deserves to run something big without the degrees, or should those jobs only belong to people who've never had their lights shut off? Who was right in this story, the board that wanted something safer, or the girl who was just stubborn enough to keep going? Tell me in the comments. What you think. Tell me if you've ever been judged like I was, or if you've ever misjudged someone and had to eat your words. I read as many of your stories as I can, and if you want more real-life stories like this, messy, unfair, hopeful, hit like, subscribe, turn on the bell, and maybe next time we'll be talking about a door you decided to open.